Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for How to Tackle Today's Most Complex Inventory Challenges, presented by Supply Chain Brief and sponsored by Gaines. I'm Tori, the webinar coordinator of Supply Chain Brief, and I'm excited to bring you this fresh session with well-earned insight on the turbulence in supply chain today and how to react faster for inventory optimization. I'm really looking forward today to talking with Andrew Cuprill, Paul Benhamu, and Bill Benton in what I'm sure will be a fascinating and amusing conversation. Also, we'll be recording this webinar in case you have to leave early. We're sending the link to the landing page in the chat box right now. Before we go any further, I want to thank Gaines for sponsoring this webinar and helping us to make this happen. At Gaines, their quest is to democratize supply chain planning. The Gaines Supply Chain Performance Optimization Platform helps businesses large and small move forward faster with greater agility, resilience, confidence, and sustainability. The Gaines AI-driven cloud platform delivers continuous cost and profit optimization via machine learning, proven algorithms, and actionable analytics for global manufacturing, distribution, retail, service parts, and maintenance operations. Innovative design combined with Gaines' proven to-path performance methodology helps rapid onboarding and tangible results, including increased sales, inventory turns, and service levels at reduced, at reduced operating costs in as little as 8 weeks. Gaines proudly provides digital supply chain planning expertise in industry leaders like Graybar, Honda Motors, Menards, Rockwell Automation, Strullers, and Textron Aviation. For more information, visit www.gainsystem.com. So thanks again, Gaines. So let's get some technical things out of the way. Please feel free to ask questions during today's session. You can do so by submitting them into the questions panel on the right side of your screen. Don't forget to stick around until the end for a Q&A session to get even more fresh insight from our panelists. My wonderful colleague Tara will be fielding your questions today. She'll be happy to answer anything you might have. And just to prove it, you can type hello into the questions panel to let her know that you're listening. Lastly, if you have any audio issues during today's presentation, you may wish to dial in by phone. You can do so by selecting the More button in the upper right portion of your screen and then selecting the Switch to Phone option. The dial-in information is on the screen, but Tara can relay that to you at any point if you need it. Today, I'm very excited to hear from Andrew, Paul, and Bill. I'm going to step out of the way and let them introduce themselves. So without further ado, take it away, guys.
Good afternoon. My name's Bill Benton. I'm the co-founder here at Gaines Systems. Been working in the field for about 30 years, conceiving, developing, deploying, and then improving inventory optimization methodologies as manifest within the Gaines platform that Tori described earlier. So I'm very pleased to have two of our better practitioners of Gaines on with us today. We'll be talking a bit about how they've approached inventory optimization and the blend of what you do through solutions and what you complement that with expertise and policy and process. So I'll pass next to Andrew for his introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. My name is Andrew Carpeel. I'm the Senior Director of Supply Chain at AmerCare Royal. At AmerCare Royal, we are a provider of one-time use restaurant disposables or food service disposables. We support 24,000 skulls across 4 different warehouses across the United States. We have operations in Canada. We're primarily an importer, but we also purchase products domestically. And most recently, within the last 2 to 3 years, we've acquired manufacturers. Our customers range from national account, national restaurant chains, and also distributors. And my responsibilities fall under managing demand and supply planning. Paul?
Thanks, Andrew. My name is Paul Benhamu. I'm the Director of Supply Chain for Benco Dental. Benco is a national dental distribution company. We are the largest privately owned dental distribution company. We have 2 larger competitors who are public companies. We have about 1,500 employees spread out throughout the nation, and about half of those are in sales and service roles. they are calling on our customers who are largely dentists, and dentists in all types of different forms of dentistry, whether that be general dentistry, oral surgery, hygienists, orthodontists, etc. Internally, we are migrating our ERP platform to Infor currently, and we have been a user of Gains for over a decade, so long-time user of Gains who really are focused on just continuing to improve our business and have Gains help us to always be getting better. Thank you.
Great. Tori, is it back to you, or should we start with question 1 here?
You can move forward with question 1, or if not, we can go ahead and run that first poll if you'd like.
No, I think we'll start with the question here. So, and then we'll go into the poll then. So this will be first to you, Andrew, and then to Paul. Question is, with inventory policy goals being altered on a more frequent basis, given the increased dynamism in the supply chain, including scarcity and volatility, can you give us a little insight into how you've managed inventory and inventory policy over the past couple of years?
Sure. So I guess I need to first start by saying we implemented Gain systems about a year ago, last September actually. So we're coming up on 12 months. So during that implementation, or prior to implementation, we did a lot of work around segmenting our items, our SKUs. That included rationalization of certain items that we didn't find profitable, but also looking at the risk of our codes. So where we had risk and scarcity of supply or delays potentially, that was an area where we wanted to invest more inventory or more safety stock. Inversely, we had products that might be facing inflationary ramifications where we didn't want to end up with a high amount of inventory, potentially having to sell that down at or below cost. So we use those factors really between risk of supply and risk of cost and O&E to determine how we wanted to set our service levels and safety stock levels.
And I'll jump in and just say, you know, our experience probably was a little different and was aided in the sense that we are already working within the Gains platform. So Bill, you said, you know, over the last couple of years. So just taking us back to March 16th or so of 2020, which I don't think any of us will ever forget. You know, our business went from booming and thriving and actually having a great year to start the year to 10% of our total normal demand, more or less overnight, just like everything else did. So we were able to use the Gains platform to help us manage our demand globally. And we chose to take, because we were really SKU heavy, we chose to take some deeper cuts into managing our demand by product line, so that, you know, we weren't just kind of guessing, right? We had a good plan on what to do. And we were able to model real business inputs into our demands on a weekly basis, even daily if we wanted to, and change our demand cases and kind of creep the business back up. So, you know, fortunately for us, that only lasted for about the first 5 or so months because, you know, we're in a healthcare business and people need to go back to the dentist and, you know, have those necessary treatments. So we largely returned to normal in terms of our overall demand, except for in the PPE line. So of course, we all experienced this massive uptick in PPE where, you know, it was unique in a healthcare environment because where other people got into it as an ancillary service or even as an opportunity to make money when prices went up, this is really core to our business. Your dentist can't work without a pair of gloves and a mask on, or you won't go to them anymore anyway. So, you know, that was an area where we had to make some outside investments outside of our normal channels, do different sourcing. And, you know, we'll talk later on in this broadcast about the challenges that came down the road in terms of, you know, what that additional sourcing created.
Thanks, Paul. So Tori's going to bring up a poll question that really revolves around the maturity of the audience's inventory policy and optimization processes. So we're very interested to see where you think you stand today and to tailor our comments and any follow-up around that. The fourth point here should read an optimized service targeting, where it ends with just the SC.
We still have a few responses coming in. I'm going to give them a few more seconds, and we're going to go ahead and share those results.
Well, this is great. This is what probably all of us on the call can think of as good job security. And that, a large majority, 75%, are sort of level 1 or level 2 maturity levels. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And I guess I'm generally glad to see this because there's a lot of action, value-added action that can be applied here to get to level 5 maturity, where we're looking across deployment and multi-echelon optimization. So thank you, Tori, for this very, very enlightening, and thanks all for voting here. We'll segue into our second question. We'll start with you here, Paul. The question here is, having experienced some excess inventory due to long order lead times, so both of you guys, I think, source from international sources and deal with having to plan far in advance. How did you address this challenge, and what actions did you need to take to right size generally? And has this experience impacted how you place orders today?
Yeah, so this is a great segue from the last question. Specifically for us, it really became, and I think for a lot of folks, the market is saturated with PPE. I don't think you even need to really be in a market that sells PPE to understand that. More or less, it was like nothing was available for a good year, and then all of a sudden everything was available, and the demand fell off a cliff, and a lot of people got stuck holding additional inventory, as you suggested. Our approach has been to try to be really creative with our options here, and in terms of looking outside of the industry. Are there other areas where we could be selling into? We've done a lot of donation, frankly, turning that problem into a positive for someone else. And then, I would say lastly, we've kind of worked on how do we turn this back into cash, and what is, if I tell you, would you buy this if I gave you a deal on it? Okay, how good of a deal do I have to give you on it? And that's kind of the dance that everybody really was doing to figure out how much cash can you turn this back into. So we've actually dedicated an entire team of people to trying to reduce that burden, really, and have done a great job. And we're more than halfway there, and that's really substantial in only, probably 6 or 7 months that we've been strongly dedicated to it.
Paul, just quick follow-up. For the other items that weren't as dramatically impacted, has your strategy changed at all for the longer lead time items, like buying smaller quantities and things to reduce exposure?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Outside of those particular items, our strategy really hasn't changed, and that's, I think, has been a benefit to working for a private company, where if we had to answer to shareholders at the end of the day, we might have had to change our strategy on other items to make them happy, and maybe at the expense of customers. So we've kept charging forward with the way that we typically do things, because we felt we were successful in those other areas. So our focus has really just been the challenge items, and not inject challenges into other areas of the business as well.
Excellent, thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, so I think similar to what Paul described, we too ended up with excess inventory, and in certain areas inventory that we probably needed to find different ways to liquidate it, and we did exercise those with through different promotional activities. One of the other things that we've done is really understand what was driving, or what has driven, our excess supply. And For AmeriCare Royal, heading into the pandemic, since we service restaurants, at that period of time, in-house dining pretty much went to a minimal, if any, and customers were ordering DoorDash. They were doing a lot of takeout. So our takeout business saw quite a bit of growth over that period of time. But as we had those discussions with our commercial team, what we've identified is we've had significantly over-optimistic forecasts coming back through that team into our team to plan. And I think the key learning is understanding, number one, our customers and the information that they are giving us, and understanding that certain items, certain categories have a greater level of optimism than others, and depending on the type of transition that we have, whether it be a new concept, a new product with a customer versus an existing product, that might dictate how much risk we're willing to take on in that plan. So I think addressing those concerns, those issues, has helped us at least mitigate the risk around excess and really talk more about putting a right-sized forecast in that matches what we believe the demand to be.
That's great. I think one of the things to highlight is as you look at the cost of inventory, looking at that from a risk-based perspective, not just a working capital percentage, right? Fee is really important. So this idea of if you have 3 customers rather than 30, your inventory policy should adjust accordingly. So that's great. Great insight. Thank you. We'll stick with you here, Andrew, on question 3 to start. Regarding supply chain planning goals and those of other groups outside of supply chain, these can create trade-offs and potentially rival priorities. How do you collaborate with your executive and commercial teams as part of the process? And what would you say is working well?
Yeah, so prior to the pandemic, we didn't really have any kind of S&OP or integrated business planning process. And part out of necessity, we realized that we had a lack of continuity across the commercial team, the supply chain team, finance, and executive. And so we started by implementing what we call integrated business planning, IBP, and we focused on some of the key categories that are core to our business. And we used that to launch, really an IBP process across our entire organization. And really the key is having some rigidity in how we plan. Not so rigid that we can't pivot or change, but we have a pretty strict schedule on how we talk about demand and supply and how that impacts our working capital. And at least the one thing I could say is we don't always get it right, but we're all holding hands around that conversation and those decisions. And that's been a real positive for AmeriCare Royal.
Yeah, I would just say our business structure is slightly unique in the sense of being in distribution. When I came into Benco, I remember being told supply chain is part of marketing, and I thought, that's pretty unique. But in a distribution environment where everything, our marketing team is really the front line for new products, is really driving what are the promotions going to be, what are the focus items. We have really continued to work really closely with one another to understand those things. And we are also working closely with our sales leadership team in conjunction with supply chain and our marketing team around what are our focuses for whatever period we're in. So we may have a quarterly focus. We may have, we're operating what we call sprints, where our sales reps are focused on a particular group of items for a 3-week period. That's generally their call cycle, and just making sure that we're all tied into one another on what are the items that are really going to make a difference and are going to move the needle, and what are the things that are just good to know about and have in your back pocket, or if they wind up moving the needle. And that's been pretty successful for us. Not to say that there aren't challenges, as Andrew suggested, but certainly with the product catalog as large as ours, it is challenging, but we've done pretty well to stay on top of it.
That's great, thank you. And I think Andrew mentioned an IBP process. Some people call that S&OP. We often refer to it as SIOP, which is Sales, Inventory, and Operations Planning, because that's one of the main binders here to get multi-group priorities aligned. So thank you for that. Paul, we'll start with you here. Question here is, how is automation and some in the gains platform equipped your business to better weather inventory challenges? And could you provide an example of how you've used this and brought it to your team and company?
Yeah, so I think, our perspective from having been within gains for many, many years, may be unique. Really interested to hear what Andrew's input is on this as well from a 1 year in user. I would say using gains is what is basically how we weather mostly all of our inventory challenges, in the sense that that's really what gains does for you. We are using gains to create our demand cases, to set target service levels that are going to drive the decisions that we make every day. We spend, the purchasing and supply chain team spend half their time working through gains. In terms of identifying challenges, we've set tons of business rules that allow us to bubble up those exceptions. When you have a product catalog that's 175,000 SKUs, not just skulls, you really have to manage by exception. And so what gains has done for us is allowed us to set our priorities. It's allowed us to identify outliers and allowed us to focus our time on the items that really need our attention and not the items that don't, frankly. And also, we've gotten a lot of custom reporting out of the system. And just one other example, we're able to now automate it in an automated fashion, send all of our vendor partners a forecast at the beginning of each month. And that's helped them to plan what we're going to need from them. And, for the ones that use it and know how to use it in an educated way, it's been a huge help.
Excellent. Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, so for us, prior to implementing gains about a year ago, we were heavily relying on spreadsheet planning. We did have a planning tool, but it was relatively basic in the sense that, like, our forecasting models, we only had one forecasting model. That system was more set up for or implemented for us to have one warehouse. And as we grew and acquired other businesses, we had multiple warehouses, and so it required us to upgrade our systems. So I think what Gains has helped us do is be more efficient in the day-to-day planning so that we can problem solve. And I think I see that, number one, I see happier employees, happier planners, because they're not frustrated with all the manual efforts that have to occur, through Excel or using spreadsheets to plan. But it empowers them to analyze data and make decisions. Specifically, if I gave you examples, if we're seeing delays with specific vendors, in the past, they didn't really have time to understand, excuse me, where those delays may be or how that's impacting our supply plan. In today's environment, they have time to understand that and either pivot, identify different routes of supply, or even, expedite inventory in order to make up for those gaps. We're also just getting into the simulation planning that Gains offers, and I see that as also another big lift for us, because we do spend a lot of time currently outside the system trying to identify different scenarios, whether, if demand increases by 15% or decreases by a certain amount, what does that do to impact our supply and even our requested purchases? So being able to use some of those simulation capabilities is going to be key for us in the future to speed up our decision-making process.
Great, thank you. Fifth question here, Paul, start with you. Service levels are an essential topic in inventory discussion. How do you manage service level goals, and what metrics or analytics have helped you to improve?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, we have a pretty large product offering, a wide variety of new and classic products that perform at different levels. We're using a simple ABC classification, and Gains has allowed us to select service levels based on classification. And then we have an overarching rule that says our private label is always going to be at the highest possible service level, because it has the greatest impact to our business in the sense that, private label products make customers stickier. You can't buy a Benco glove from someone else, from a competitor. So that's really the way that we've set our service levels. In terms of our analytics, just a couple things. I love the, I'm a firm believer in the classic fill rate and turns relationship. So understanding what rate we're filling compared to how much we're turning our inventory and trying to strike that correct balance between the two. That's going to tell us, what are we underperforming or are we overperforming? Because, from a delivery standpoint, we could be doing either. Unfortunately, we've been doing more over the last couple of years. I think most people are doing more underperforming than overperforming from a delivery standpoint, but that's challenges in the market, not the system that we're using. And then, one other thing that we've developed, I'll just say outside of the Gains platform, we use a business intelligence tool called ClickSense, which has been really useful to us. Very flexible, a lot of real-time data. And one thing that I look very close at, and I look at with my team in our one-to-ones, is what items are we missing? So we're able to see, even as soon as yesterday, what items did we miss on a customer order yesterday, and the day before, and for the last week, and for the last year, and any period of time you want, basically. So that's educated our conversations with our vendor partners, but it also allows us to identify the outliers before it's too late. That, oh my gosh, there's a really small hole in the bucket today that's going to become bigger if we don't address it now.
Great. That sounds like really helpful tactical information for diagnostics. That's cool. Yeah. Andrew?
Yeah, very similar to Paul. We use classic fill rate metrics and turns to understand, how efficiently are we moving our inventory and what percentage are we filling it at. We do use Power BI heavily, where we're importing information, order level information, to understand that data. One of the things that we use, we call it a enhanced supply plan, but it's basically a model where we're pumping in demand and supply and projecting out based on those parameters plus what we have on hand. Do we have any gaps in our plan out beyond lead time, I'd say. And what we've done, through the pandemic, we found scarcity in supply on some of our key accounts where, when you think of a national chain account restaurant, if they're out of gloves or takeout containers or a cutlery item, we could essentially shut them down, which impacts their revenue. So we've taken an approach of focusing on, most impactful codes, most impactful customers, and looking out beyond the next couple of months to identify, do we need to pull some POs in? Do we have any delays that potentially drive us into safety stocks? And we use that to react and plan and execute.
And just quick follow-up, and how are you setting service level goals, right? So is that by product family or by class or some combination?
Yeah, so it's really a combination. We've segmented our products by product division or functionality, and within that we have an ABC categorization, and then we also take a look at specific private label critical items that also get categorized as such. But essentially, we're using customer feedback and information to understand, do our A items need to be at like a 98% service level versus your B or C's, which might have a lower fill rate goal.
Got it. Okay, great. Go back to you here, Andrew, on question number 6, which is, how do you anticipate inventory challenges evolving? Do you anticipate some differences in the next few quarters versus what you've seen? And are there any particular ways that you're preparing?
Yeah, so I think most of my answers come back to understanding forecasts and really understanding is history going to reflect what we believe is going to happen in the future, and being able to adjust for that. So we have a demand planning team that's looking at forecasts at an item location level, and based on our IBP process, if our commercial team is saying that sales are softening in the marketplace, that might drive our demand planners to adjust history potentially or look at different models to account for that. But I think the power is really in our customer discussions to really sense and understand what our demand is going to look like, and that helps really understand how we should set our inventory levels. I think that the other thing that we do spend a lot of time in is understanding on the supply end what kind of constraints do we have. We actually have an office in Shenzhen, China, where we have a full sourcing team that works with our vendors to understand what kind of challenges they're facing, and we use that to help gauge, what kind of hedges do we need to make on inventory? Do we potentially see capacity tightening? Especially in China when they have large events like the Olympics, you might see factory shutdowns or potentially capacity constraints that might drive you to hedge buys or pull some volume forward in order to account for that. So I think that the power's in the discussion and the relationships that we have with our customers and our suppliers.
Thank you. Yeah, thorough. That's great. Thank you. And Paul, you mentioned as a private company, you guys have a long-term focus. So the extent to which challenges and ways to prepare for those are evolving might be a little less dramatic, but are there some that you foresee Benco having to face that are a little bit different in the near future than current, and anything you might be doing to address that?
Yeah, so I have a joking answer for you, which is if I knew what challenges were coming, I'd be in Vegas, instead of where we are today. But in all seriousness, the last couple of years really have become a game of whack-a-mole in some cases. Just as soon as you fix one problem, another one arises. I think one of the things I really have seen changing, and maybe to some extent you hear more talk about it than you see execution out in the actual field, but something that I know people are focused on is the way companies store safety stock inventory, particularly manufacturers and suppliers. I heard someone say the other day, which I thought was said perfectly, companies transitioning from just in time to just in case. So, I think we have seen some of our suppliers doing that, and it's been a huge help. Of course, it comes at the expense of additional bottom line costs, but if they can help their organizations to understand the benefits, then that can be a huge help. One of the ways that we're really trying to get our head around what are the challenges that are coming and how do we need to address those is something that we've started to jokingly call supplier speed dating. So rather than setting up a hour-and-a-half long business review with every supplier you have, which depending on your supply base could be pretty difficult to do, we've been setting up 15-minute meetings every quarter or so, maybe 2 quarters, depending on the partner, identifying the most critical suppliers to do that with, and getting right to the point. Hey, hi, hello, how are you? What challenges are you seeing down the road? What things should we be anticipating? How is your supply of materials? And just opening those conversations and opening the door to find that information out, particularly in a distribution environment where you're reliant on someone else to deliver, has been really, really helpful. And I think it's something we're going to continue to do into the foreseeable future.
That sounds like a great new and efficient process. Good stuff. Thanks, Paul. Tori, I think we were going to have one last poll question, which was sort of a segue from this as we talk about things that people might be doing to address future inventory challenges, or at least address current ones more rapidly. So if it's available, we could display that next poll question.
Absolutely, I'll get that poll launched right now.
Thank you. All right, this one's a little bit quicker. I think that's great. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go ahead and display those results.
Thank you. All right. Well, that's an interesting dichotomy compared to the earlier poll, which showed about 75%, almost the opposite in early stages of maturity. So hopefully we can spark some enthusiasm and drive here, because we can think that as interest rates rise, supply remains highly volatile, that steady state processes might leave some money on and service on the table, so to speak. So fascinating stuff. Thank you, Tori. That's great. Good. So just a final question here before question and answer. We'll start with Paul. You know, we're going to each go around the room and talk about what piece of advice you would give. I'll give just a bit and then segue to you, Paul. From our end, we would recommend starting small but doing something, right? So when we look at that last poll, you know, the idea might be to have quick wins with incremental change. You don't have to go from sort of level 1 maturity to level 5 in some massive transformation in order to have really strong results. So that would be mine. Paul, any advice you'd give?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that I always preach with my teams, and especially when we bring on new associates, is the idea of understanding all of the decisions that are being made in your various systems. One of the beautiful things about a platform like Gains or any other inventory optimization is that, let's face it, the system does a lot of the heavy lifting, and that's superb. One of the pitfalls of that can be, you know, why did X happen? I don't know, the system said, you know. So, you know, my biggest piece of advice would just be always be turning over those rocks to make sure that we do trust the system, but we want to understand that we know what it's doing and what business rules it's executing, and that we agree with them.
Great, thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, so I think for us, I go back to stability and finding the way to stabilize the day-to-day. And, you know, prior to launching Gains, we were working in spreadsheets. We put a lot of time and effort into just placing purchase orders and understanding what our demand is. And, you know, Gains has been an enabler for us to do other things, to focus on the broader picture. And, you know, with that, you know, I think it comes with, you know, good people, good systems, and good processes. And that's allowed us to, you know, really focus on what does our network look like? Do we have the right number of warehouses? Are we located in the right locations? Like all those things that we didn't have time to talk about and do, we're now able to focus on. And we've invested in like a network optimization program, not a program, but really a project, for lack of a better term, where we've really unraveled all of our policies. And you know, I don't think we would have been able to do that if we were still fighting fires on the day-to-day basis. And you know, from that, we've been able to improve service and really drive our turns to a more productive state.
Excellent. Well, that's great. Thank you. I just thought we'd open up now the discussion to our audience and any questions that might have come in.
Absolutely, and thank you for such an insightful webinar. Before we dive into questions, I want to remind everyone that now is the time to get straight from the source insight from Andrew, Bill, and Paul. Great questions contribute to a great webinar, so don't forget to submit some questions. Additionally, we understand if you need to run, just know that today's session is being recorded and will be emailed to you in the next 48 hours. If we don't get to your question today, you can connect with them via social media, which we will put in the chat box right now. Okay, so the first question is coming from Austin. It says, have you had to change or eliminate SKUs, either short-term or long-term, based on supply? And are you merging demand streams?
Yeah, I can answer that because the answer is yes. We have, again, because of the excess that we talked about earlier, we have had to consolidate demand. So when an item runs out, we have a choice to either replenish that item or try to channel that demand into another item that we may have access of. And we have been able to do that, particularly on SKUs that are very similar to one another. Think of like a mask or even a glove, compared to something that has really as a specialty product that it's difficult to have a one-for-one substitute for. But we have done that with great success, really.
Yeah, I could say with us, we have used SKU rationalization to help us in supply, just in areas that we weren't profitable in. We started to look at those items to determine were they critical to our operation. Some of the other things we've seen recently, though, within our business, we're faced with various plastic bans or foam bans in regions or states that are coastal, and that's working its way through the entire United States. So as we change our portfolio to more of a compostable type of product, we're linking demand from those old products to the replacement product, which is something that we're kind of in the midst of, which is going to drive additional growth if we're able to do it quicker than our competitors.
Excellent. Tori, any other questions?
Yes, the next one's coming in from Ronit, and it says, what is the expected % inventory accuracy you all expect to have?
So for us, inventory accuracy levels in the warehouse, I think that's kind of where we start. If we have inventory accuracy issues at that level, then our whole planning becomes a challenge. So we're looking at above 99% accuracy at the warehouse level. 99.95 or something ridiculous like that, where we're trying to really hone in on accuracy, and that really comes down to transactions in the warehouse, making sure that we have all the right controls and processes in place to ensure that whatever's in our system matches what's in the racks.
Yeah,
Agreed.
Go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
No, oh, sorry, Bill. Please, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I was going to say that a lot of people talk about, garbage in, garbage out. We've all heard that term as it relates to systems. We sort of take a different perspective, which is, the hygiene of your data determines the amount of buffers that you can reduce, right? So if you do have inventory accuracy issues, and some of our customers do, because they're not talking about a few large, well-managed warehouses with good transaction systems like your companies would have, but maybe field service operations where some inventory is in the back of a technician's truck, and you don't know what's been damaged or what's been returned but not registered as a return, et cetera. So from a Gaines perspective, we will look at inventory accuracy as another variable that affects your supplies. So when we talked about maturity and inventory planning, there's supply variability, which could come from lead time from vendors, which Paul and Andrew know well, but also from availability and returns and other complexities in terms of inventory accuracy. So good question. Paul, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
I think you guys covered it. I would say same again for us.
Thank you guys for that breakdown. And Ronit would also like to know, do you automatically replenish new POs once material moves to MRB? Or do you have a period of time hoping MRB material can be salvaged?
I'm not familiar with the acronym. What is MRB in this? Do you have
similar to like MRO?
Yeah, so Ronit, if you could put that in the chat. Okay, material review board.
Okay.
Sounds like it might be excess material, if I'm interpreting correctly. Would that be, is that right?
Well, she said salvage, so I assume, we're assuming loss of some kind. So, in
yes,
our
Ronit
system,
did clarify they meant failure. So a failure of product, I believe.
I think Rana stumped us here. I think it's just a different aspect of the business and of supply chain. I would say, based on what I'm understanding, typically for in our aspect of the business, we would replenish that stock, especially if we had a high level of confidence that we were going to use it or it was going to sell. There may be other scenarios where it's a low volume item or there's a high cost to serve on that particular item where, you know, maybe it would be worth pausing and seeing if there's any opportunity to salvage.
From a gains sort of planning perspective, we look at yield as another form of supply variability. So there's the lead time variation, and then there's receiving something and actually having less of it than ordered available, whether because you were short shipped or because there was a defect in the manufacturing process and you had quality issues, or with some of our like pharmaceutical or biological manufacturers, you might end up with a different outcome than you anticipated. So we'll look at that and we'll have appropriate buffers in place to manage failures like that. Anyway, Andrew, anything else on that, on this point from your perspective, or?
No, we do have products with a shelf life. Not many in our industry, but we do have a few. And what we've had to do is basically manage that through our own ERP system, understanding what our shelf lives are, and really just paying close attention to, you know, what our expiration dates are versus what our supply is. So in those events, like for example, we have materials like a plant-based plastic, we call it PLA, and that breaks down over time as it's exposed to heat. Therefore, you know, over a 2-year period, if we hit a 6-month remaining shelf life, we have to flag those items, and we do that manually, but we are tracking that and identifying if we have any risk of shelf life expiration. Then we do actually have to look at, you know, demand. Are we sitting on that product because we just have a poor FIFO practice in the warehouse, or do we actually have to look at our demand signals? Are we buying more than what our actual demand is and adjust the forecasts according to dampen the signal?
Andrew, that's an interesting interpretation from a shelf life perspective. One thing I'll just briefly comment on is, and we might perhaps talk about this if this becomes more important, is Gaines has what we call proactive FIFO enablement. FIFO is not FIFO, first in, first out. It's first expiration, first out, where Gaines can look lot by lot and will proactively redistribute from a location where the lot's likely to hit that expiration threshold, there's 6 months remaining, and move it to locations with enough demand to consume that and the other lots they already have on hand that are presumably younger. So that might help too. Not sure if that's the same context, but thank you. Tori, any other questions?
Absolutely. One of our audience members is asking, what are some KPIs you monitor for success?
For us, I'd say our biggest KPIs, forecast accuracy and bias. We're looking at our fill rates, case fill rate, line fill rate, order fill rate. We also look at default shipping location alongside of fill rate. So are we alt shipping often, or are we reducing the amount of out of region shipments that we have? And then of course, inventory and inventory turns. You know, I think unfortunately we're not short for metrics. So the trick is really understanding, you know, the few most impactful or important metrics, and it really, it comes back down to, you know, service, inventory, and cost, and those are the things that we track on a monthly basis.
Yeah, very similar to Andrew. You know, we're very heavily focused, as there's always another metric to review in the supply chain, but you know, the turn and fill rate metric is going to tell you a lot about the health of your business. We measure our vendor partners on what % of their PO lines are past due as well, to try to identify which vendors need the most attention or hand holding. And we also look at incremental shipping. So Andrew called it, you know, alternate shipping. We call it incremental shipping. How often are we shipping a product or a box from another distribution center, which is costing us additional time, resources, money? And we're looking at that on the aggregate and also at a vendor level for the same reason. You know, in particular, over the last couple of years, we've actually been able to recover a fair amount of money from vendor partners who, you know, failed to deliver on their purchase orders and subsequently cost a pretty considerable amount of money to do additional shipments. So those are the ones, you know, there's tons of them, but those are the ones that we're the most focused on.
I think for us, it's the reporting levels. If I'm working with a planner or a manager, we're going to drill down. We're going to look at divisions and classes of products and locations to understand, you know, where are we failing. Whereas if I'm reporting it up, we're going to aggregate it in more executive types of forms. So I think that's the trick we all struggle with. It's like, what level of detail are you sharing with which internal or external customers?
That's a good point.
Andrew and Paul, in terms of fill rate, do you guys look at both complete orders as well as line item, and which one would you say predominates from an overall like executive perspective of delivery?
I'd say from our perspective, you know, I look at line item fill rate as, for me and my team, from a planning perspective, a good measure of success. You know, sometimes you could look at a case fill rate, and your case fill rates could look, you know, very, very good, but it might not actually indicate how well you're planning at a skull level. So I think line is a great indicator. Order fulfillment, we do also look at, you know, I guess the perfect order in terms of, you know, if a customer places an order for 10 line items, you know, did we fill all in full on time, no defects? That's a little bit more strenuous, and it's a kind of a longer journey type of metric that we keep an eye on. But you know, I think line for me is the best indicator.
The same for us. We do measure what we call order complete and line item fill rate. I tend to focus more on the line item fill rate because it's less subject to the order itself. You know, we did a statistical analysis several years ago that basically said once you get to about 8 lines on the order, the statistical likelihood of you having all of those lines is relatively low. And so when you look at it just at the line item level, I think that's the best indicator of how you're planning and whether or not you're delivering on your customers' needs. I also think there's been a little bit of an evolution over the last few years with a lot of things switching to e-commerce. Well, I don't know if customers care as much that they're getting 1 box or 2 boxes or 3 boxes, because people are used to that. You know, you order 10 things on, you know, that website with the A that starts with the A there, and they have 7 different delivery dates. And as long as you know when you're going to get them, you know, I think people are generally satisfied by that. So it's really more of an internal struggle to not be the one who's shipping those 8 boxes.
Yeah, I think kind of tack on to that, Paul. We ship to broadline distributors, and so getting that complete order does have a great importance, because they might need to close that purchase order out, and if they have to keep the PO open because they've got 2 or 3 lines shipping, you know, after the fact, it makes it a little bit more difficult for them to manage. So we've had to look at our internal processes alongside of our ERP to understand how we allocate inventory to our orders. And we've put some process in place to basically help us, you know, build the complete order, so to speak. Like if we have a 10-day lead time from the time a customer orders to the time we deliver to them, that gives us enough time to receive product in if there is a delay on the water, if it's due within that same week, or potentially transfer product if we have a reasonable transfer to make within, you know, 2 different regional warehouses. So I guess it really just depends on what's important to your customer.
It looks like we have about enough time for 1 or 2 more questions. Our next question is coming in from Sarang, and it says, could you suggest some tips for inventory strategy, like how to manage inventory when forecast accuracy is very low and business is very dynamic?
Go ahead.
I'll draw on some other experiences. You know, prior to coming to AmerCare Royal, I was in the automotive industry, and in aftermarket actually. And so when we were working with our customers, they would require us to carry parts for, a very broad line of automotive makes, models, years. It didn't necessarily mean we would always stock all of those items. So if we deemed something as unforecastable, instead of planning, using a forecast, we might run a min-max model or something to that nature, or just really put hard lines and say, if we always have to have this part in stock, we're gonna carry 2 of them on hand, and that's the hard line that we're going to take. And if we see demand increase above that, then we can either use different methods of expediting or working with domestic supply to get that part in. We found it to be more efficient and cheaper, both from a cost and cash perspective, to run, I guess, different types of replenishment models depending on the type of product. So it wasn't a one size fits all.
Yeah, that dovetails. I'm glad you went first because you described it in better context. From an algorithmic perspective, Gaines will select a reorder point approach rather than a time-phased forecast supply planning. And we have a bootstrap algorithm that does thousands of simulations to determine what level of units would have filled the target service. So you don't try to forecast it, you just try to get that reorder point correct. And it goes back and it tests how much service level would I have delivered over several thousand simulations with 1 unit, how much with 2 units, how much with 3 units, so on and so forth, until it builds up to that service level delivered. So good question. I think we're at the hour, so great questions. That was fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it looks like that is all the time that we have for today. I hope you all enjoyed this webinar just as much as I did. Thanks to our sponsor, Gaines, and our incredible speakers, Andrew, Bill, and Paul, for taking the time to answer our burning questions and giving us such wonderful information. And a huge thank you to you all for attending. I'm Tori, and I hope you have a productive rest of your week. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you.